Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with pianist, multi-instrumentalist, composer, arranger, and a producer, Miles Black. Very talented cat. Named after the master Miles Davis. He was born in Port Alberni, British Columbia, and learned both jazz and classical music early on with great teaching. He was performing professionally by the age of 14 and has gone on to be with the best in the business, with cats like Lee Konitz, Hampton, George Coleman, Scott Hamilton, Sheila Jordan, Chuck Israels, and on and on. He's performed with the Oliver Gannon Quartet for quite some time, and he is also an educator. So get to know Miles and dig this interview, my friends.
We are golden. Miles, thank you for taking some time out for me today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And I just got to tell you up front, there's probably about 5 or 6 words that I use on a regular basis in my life, and I think Miles is number 2. My son's name is Miles, so I say it a lot.
Cool.
Were you named after Miles Davis?
I was, yeah. Believe it or not, I was, yeah.
Yeah, interestingly enough, that was my angle. I didn't really go into it thinking it was going to be it, but it just made sense, so he's another Miles Davis clone, too. So, again, thank you. And what I want to do is I want to start out here. I know that you're pretty good about explaining what's going on with the activity. I've gone over your website. But I want, in your own words, what is going on with you lately?
You know, like most musicians, I've had a pretty varied career, a little bit of teaching, some clinic, lots of performing, and lots of arranging. I'm sitting here right now writing string quartet arrangements, which is a lot of fun, and some horn parts for people's albums. Got a recording studio. I've got my jazzcuts.com business, so we just launched that. I'm working hard on getting that out there in the world. And lots of jazz gigs.
So you're keeping it varied and going. That was the flavor that I really felt like. So as I peel back the onion layers here, I'm going to start at the alpha, the core, the seed, and ask you, you were born in Port Alberni, British Columbia. How did you get to a point where you're doing what you're doing today? What gave you the music and jazz bug early on in your life?
Well, it had to be my parents. My mom's an artist, and my dad was a guitar player and a poet, and so we had a house that was infused with a lot of hippies playing music all the time. My dad always had a great sound system, and he always played wonderful, jazz and great rock and blues albums, lots of blues. So I think my brother and I both got into music at a young age so we could jam with my dad and his friends. He had a lot of instruments around the house, and we played a lot of blues every weekend when we were little kids. And then it just kind of kept going from there, basically. It was a nice foundation.
So what albums were you listening to jazz-wise that really got you going?
When I was 13, my dad's friend Art gave me 7 old vinyl records. And they were a real mix, Joe. We had Kind of Blue, that was sort of your classic album to have. And that really turned my crank as a young kid. I mean, I just turned my head around. But I also had a bunch of albums by Roland Kirk that he gave me. Volunteered Slavery and We Three Kings and things like that. And then on top of that, there was Time Out, Dave Brubeck. I think there was Modern Jazz Quartet in there. And then of some really far-out John Coltrane albums, like Expressions, Meditations, that kind of stuff. And so as a young guy listening to jazz, I thought, I just assumed that was all under the big umbrella called jazz. So I got into a lot of types of jazz at a young age. A lot of free jazz type things, and then mixed with the blues, and I got really into Ray Bryant, Tommy Flanagan, Bill Evans, and Keith Jarrett when I was a kid. And I had a great teacher, Joe, man. I had a wonderful teacher named George Essihoff, so I was really lucky because he was really into exploring the piano to its fullest extent and creating the most beautiful sound you could get out of the instrument. And he was really into exploration in jazz, so he didn't stick me in any boxes. Right up, like my very first lesson, we just jammed on a chromatic scale for half an hour. And that was the real eye-opener.
You touched on George, and then, you were playing professionally at 14. At 18, you worked as a music therapist. It just seems like your life, your constellation map was music. Is that safe to say that's what you wanted your life to be?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Although before that, I was planning on being a visual artist. My mom's a visual artist, and there's a lot of those in my family. And I thought, well, that would have been a nice career path for me. But, music took over pretty young. I was 13. I was convinced I'd be a professional. And here I am, man, 37 years later.
Yeah, you're talking about, Tommy Flanagan and all these guys. Dream realized you play with Lee Konitz, Hampton, George Coleman, Chuck Israels, Lou Tabak, and you got, Ingrid Jensen out there in Canada. I mean, you got all these people that you've played with, what has it been like when you sit back, you're doing this for a long time, how does it feel, how does your career feel right now, and all of this mileage that you've gained?
That's the funny thing. I think about that often because, I've been doing this for 37 years, and I think, well, I still feel like a beginner. It feels so fresh and new, and I'm still playing a lot of the same tunes I played when I was a kid. I'm still finding lots of new ways to play the music. It's just such a blessing to be a jazz musician, man. I mean, because you get to always play with new people. You get to play the same music sometimes, but reinterpret it in a completely different way. That's the thing about jazz that I've always loved, the spontaneity, the creativity, the playing with other people especially. I love that.
Well, and one of those sojourns, I'm going to get into a couple of them here, is Oliver Gannon, and I've interviewed him. He's a very cool cat. You've played with him since '93. What's it like to play with him?
Oh, man, Ollie and I go way back, and yeah, I love playing with Ollie. He knows so much about music, and, because he studied all, classical orchestration and everything like that. So, there's just such a depth to his musicality. And he's been getting pretty good on the piano lately, so sometimes I play other instruments with him. And we have a lot of fun doing that and just changing the shoes around. He's a blast. Ollie's the greatest. And like I say, he knows a lot, way too much about music.
Well, and the one thing, too, as you mentioned up top of the hour when you talk about what you're doing, you're a composer and a writer. You've worked with Glenda Ray, written 400 song credits, many more, I'm sure. What is it like to kind of toggle that whole writing, composing with playing and teaching and all of that?
Well, every day's different. Even teaching, you never have a homogenized approach. For every student requires a different methodology or a sensitivity towards their needs. And all the gigs are like that, too. Every venue's different, so there's no cookie-cutter approach to any of it. So I just try to stay very loose in the moment, not have too many preconceptions about anything. I think that really helps.
Who are your jazz heroes? I mean, you mentioned some big albums, but if you could really boil it down to, like, who's been really influential in the way you've played, who would it be?
Well, I really, really appreciate Duke Ellington a lot for his kind of really fresh take, and Billy Strayhorn, too. They have just a really fresh look at putting music together. I don't know if it's because Duke had synesthesia, and he was able to see color in music, and I've always had a real color association with music, too. So I think to him, and definitely there's some other folks, some more modern musicians like Metheny and Lyle Mays have always really turned me on musically. And then, of course, there's Bill Evans, that had a major impact and continues to do so. And Jim Hall, because I'm a guitar player, so I'm very into Jim Hall.
The one thing you mentioned, very early on, even before I get to this question, is you talked about how much you appreciate being a jazz musician and love it. And obviously you've dedicated your life to it. But let me ask you straight up, why do you love jazz?
I love it so much because it's fresh. Every time I sit down at the piano or the guitar or the sax or whatever I'm playing, the bass, it just feels new. It always feels new, and it feels like a new challenge, a new day. Never, ever get tired of rediscovering these beautiful songs that I've been playing for years or learning new material. So it offers me fresh opportunities to meet new people, to travel around the world, to reinvent my life every single day. I have to say that's a big reason why I wanted to start up the website too, is just to kind of share that with people maybe who don't have that opportunity to do that all the time, to get out there and just start improvising, even if it's only on one chord or on two chords.
What does travel do for you? That's the great thing about being a musician. I'm always kind of envious of, because, I don't travel as much as a musician, but when I hear all these places and stories, what does that do to add to you, not only as a musician composing and writing and creating things for people to enjoy art, but just as a human being, how does it make you grow?
Well, I think, like, as most people would say when they travel, it makes you look at the world in a very different way. Sometimes it makes you really appreciate what you have in the place that you live. And then other times you gain such a fresh perspective on the world that we live in and what other people are going through and how they relate to music and what music means to them. And I remember playing in the Soviet Union, and people were so moved. I mean, after a concert, 6,000 people would run up to the front of the stage and throw flowers at you, and they were just crying. And you go to places in the world. I even did a gig once up near the North Pole. Only music seems to be able to take me to all the places I've gone to. I can't imagine another career path that would offer that sort of perspective.
Yeah, that's cool. Let me ask you this. Speaking of fans throwing roses in unique situations, what's one of the nicest things a fan has said to you about your music?
That's an interesting question. I think, sometimes people say that I'm able to engage them in a storytelling way with my music. It's not, I've never been much about flash, kind of trying to find a way to play slower all the time. So some people have commented on, my ability to delve deep into more of the dynamic nature of the music or the emotional nature of the music than just twiddling my fingers as fast as possible.
That's cool. I always hear that that's a big deal with the musician when the fan, the person that's not the engineer or the musician can recognize those things. That has to feel really good. The one thing that, and this is my final question for you, that I really want to kind of get into is everyone has a version of who you are, your family, your friends, your business associates. But when you wake up in the morning and you go out, you face the world, who are you? Who do you think you are?
Well, you know what? Ultimately, I'm not a musician. I'm a human being, a member of the species here. I'm sharing this planet with all the animals and plant people, and so I don't define myself by my music. If I wasn't doing music, I would find some other way to help out, to share who I am with the planet, and hopefully leave it a little bit of a better place. So that's what I think of. Obviously, the first thing I get in the morning is I'm walking my dog. So number one, I'm Miles the dog walker, who's happy with my dog. Other times, I'm going to be a grandfather soon, so soon I'll be Miles the grandfather. A husband to my wife and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, very cool. Well, Miles, man, hey, thank you not only for your time but for your music. I'm really looking forward to introducing you to the audience, not only here in Kansas City but all around. So I appreciate you giving me some time.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Miles for his time, his music, and all those stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or visit YouTube and type in Neon Jazz. And for all things Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.